Yesterday morning, 3 masked gunmen stormed the headquarters of the French satire magazine Charlie Hebdo. The attackers forced one of the cartoonists to open the door with a security code and then headed straight towards the paper's editor, Stéphane Charbonnier, better known as Charb, who was in an editorial staff meeting. In the encounter, the gunmen killed Charb, his bodyguards, and many more journalists. Several minutes later, the attackers left the building and shot a police officer and escaped with a vehicle. In the end, 10 journalists and 2 police officers were killed. It was the deadliest terrorist attack on French soil in 50 years. Representatives of ISIS quickly praised the massacre as an act of revenge for the magazine's insults against Islam and the Prophet Muhammed. But a closer look at the long-term implications reveals a more complex and a more profound motive that is meant to shake Europe and radicalize European Muslims. Welcome to Caspian Report by me, Shirvan. From the surface, the attack appears as a horrifying act of terrorism. But as we explained in the previous report, what do terrorists want? The mindset of terrorism primarily focuses on the psychological consequences rather than the physical consequences. The physical effects in Paris left 12 people dead, including the famous editor Charb. Now it's true that his magazine is widely known for ridiculing Islam and the Prophet Muhammad, and that the editors received multiple death threats throughout the years. In fact, a Molotov cocktail attack completely destroyed the magazine's office in Paris in November 2011. This was in response to the publication of caricatures of the Prophet Muhammad. Since then, the magazine's offices and some of its employees have been under police protection. Furthermore, the magazine's editors refused to tone down their content, and for this reason, Inspire magazine, which is the Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula's official magazine, published a death list in the 10th edition. This included Charbonnier. So on the surface, it does appear as if Charb and his staff were the primary targets. But when we examine the photos and the videos of the attack, it appears that the attackers knew exactly what they were doing. The way they handled their weapons, moved and shot shows that they were trained in small arms and small unit tactics. Furthermore, the attacks come at a time when the role of Muslim minorities in France is the subject of heated public debate. It also happens at a time when the far-right political party, the National Front, is experiencing record levels of popular support and approval, and thus will be a serious contender for the presidential elections set in 2017. A similar controversial situation exists in Germany, where massive anti-Muslim and anti-immigration protests have taken place in recent months. Other European cities who have experienced recent tensions with Muslim minorities include the Netherlands, Sweden, Denmark, and many more. In short, the attack comes at a time when Europe is experiencing the rise of far-right political parties and nationalist movements, so the aftermath of the Charlie Hebdo massacre will be met with far-right political movements using the terrorist attack in Paris as a platform to launch a new anti-Islamic campaign and thus increasing anti-Islamic rhetoric across Europe. At first glance, this attack may seem counterproductive, but if you have watched Caspian Report before, you know that the world doesn't play checkers, but chess. It's never about direct consequences, rather it's about long-term indirect effects. What seems counterproductive now will serve the jihadists' goal in the long term. And here is where things get more complicated. The long-term psychological consequences. From Al-Qaeda's narrative, tensions between Europeans and Muslim minorities is exactly what they require. You see, the moment you discriminate a group of people, that group will be isolated from the society. Over time, that isolation will force the group to unite among their own kind, which is exactly the opposite of integration into European societies. Over time, the isolated group will radicalize, as their ideology will become their sole pillar of strength and unity. This is how historically persecuted and oppressed people radicalized. So right now in Europe, moderate Muslims by far outweigh the radical Muslims. But when Muslims across Europe are collectively held responsible for the massacre in Paris, the moderate Muslims will be isolated from the European societies. Once that happens, the moderate Muslims will seek shelter and support among their own kind. Over time, this isolation and separation will lead to the radicalization of moderate Muslims in Europe. So from Al-Qaeda's perspective, this means that their number of sympathizers in Europe will dramatically increase, and subsequently that means more lone wolves and grassroots terrorists. Think of this as Al-Qaeda's long-term recruitment program. This also explains the whole purpose behind the Al-Qaeda published death list. In the narrative of Niccolo Machiavelli, it is necessary to be a great pretender. Men are so simple, so subject to present necessities, that those who seek to deceive will always find someone who will allow himself to be deceived. The most important thing for a leader is to appear merciful, faithful, humane, upright, and religious. There is nothing more necessary to appear to have than this last quality. Religion, like fear, hatred, and mercy, is a tool used by politicians and religious leaders to manipulate and shape the minds of the mainstream population. The thing is, every jihadist attack in North America and Europe has been conducted with the sheer intention to provoke a reaction. The Charlie Hebdo massacre is no different. It is meant to strike fear and panic, but it is also meant to anger the European societies and further stimulate the rise of far-right political parties and thereby heighten the tensions between Muslim minorities and the European societies across the continent. And from this, the isolation and the radicalization of Muslim Europeans. Most people tend to make the mistake and see terrorists as religious fanatics and not as intelligent psychological manipulators. The truth is that most Muslim terrorist attacks in history are based on Hitler's Reichstag fire and his rise to power. Al-Qaeda did it, ISIS did it, and the same goes for the Charlie Hebdo attack. It is important to remember that during a terrorist attack, the psychological consequences are by far more dangerous than the physical consequences. To counter this, we must make post-attack decisions based on reason, not on emotion. Anyways, this was a Caspian report by me, Shirvan. Thank you for watching, take care, and Sahol.